Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world. TV news anchors, lies and exaggeration. Who can you trust?
I want to apologize. I said I was traveling in an aircraft that was hit by RPG fire. I was instead in a following aircraft.
In a message to his colleagues over the weekend, Brian told us he's taking several days off this broadcast amid questions over how he recalled certain stories he covered.
Can you survive on $7.25? Debating the case for raising the minimum wage. And in memory of Joan Rivers, her Fifth Avenue palace going for sale for $30 million. So who can you believe nowadays? The NBC News anchor Brian Williams has admitted telling an untruth by giving a misleading account of being attacked when he was reporting from Iraq. Well, now he's been suspended for 6 months without pay for what his company called inexcusable actions. Well, with me this week, as usual, the Democrat commentator Jeffrey Robinson standing by for us in New York, and the Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams is in Washington. Now, Jeffrey, perish the thought we should ever embellish anything in our lives. Have you ever done this?
I'm an old-fashioned journalist who believes in old-fashioned journalist ethics. No, you don't do that, and he did, and it's a firing offense. He will not be back after 6 months. I'm almost sure of that.
Armstrong Williams?
This is not just something that happened once. It happened often. And if you read Marie Dowell's piece in the New York Times over the weekend, NBC employees felt that he was just a liar. The fact that they knew this and the NBC executives like Steve Kappas and others did not rein this under control after there were complaints from NBC producers a year ago that this is going to be embarrassing and humiliating if you don't do something about it. You just cannot blame Brian Williams. Yes, he has ultimate responsibility, but you almost also should look at his enablers who played a role in this devastating black eye to broadcast journalism.
Well, at our studio in Washington is the media analyst of the Daily Beast and Fox News. That's Howard Kurtz. Howard, your take on this. Did he have to go?
Well, he certainly had to be suspended, punished, because Brian Williams, essentially blew up his own credibility. I mean, he didn't just tell an untruth. He told a war story about being hit in a helicopter over Iraq. And this is 12 years ago, and he's been telling various versions of it since, when he in fact was not under direct and hostile fire. And so NBC looked like nobody was in charge. Williams himself had announced he was going to take a few days off from his top-rated newscast here in America. And finally, the pressure got to be so great, the atmosphere so toxic, that NBC had to act. Whether he can come back, I don't know. A lot of people are telling me that it's very hard for somebody in the news business who sits in front of a camera to get that credibility back after it's been so badly tarnished.
Here's the weird thing. The fib, the embellishment, as you said, happened 12 years ago. Why did it take this long to be exposed?
Well, in part because it wasn't until last week that Brian Williams retold the story on his own NBC nightly newscast, and that prompted some Army veterans who were on that mission in Iraq to go to a newspaper here and say, no, it didn't happen that way. He wasn't on that chopper. But he had told various versions to the comedian David Letterman and others. It's surprising this didn't come out earlier. But also you have to say, I mean, this guy is not a war correspondent. He doesn't pretend to be. He did take a risk in going to Iraq and flying an Army helicopter. There was no need to embellish the story and make it better by saying his chopper was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. And so something propelled him to do that, and now he is paying a very heavy professional price for that misleading account.
Jeffrey, do you think this would have had to happen anyway, or is this actually because of the competitive nature, particularly of the old beast of the nightly news, the 6:30 show between the three monsters of news, that actually there was momentum there that the others weighed in on their rival?
Well, the others have certainly played it up as news stories. But let me say this. If you look at CBS Evening News, NBC Nightly, and the ABC 6:30 News, what you're talking about is the anchor's credibility. That's all. They all cover basically the same stories. They all cover them with equal professionalism and really sensational journalism, terrific journalism. So you watch it because of the man sitting behind the desk. And his credibility is everything. Once that goes, it's shot. But there's something else that hasn't been discussed about Brian Williams that really bothered me, and it happened last December. He is the managing editor of, or was the managing editor of NBC News and Nightly News. He was the boss. He chose what stories to put on the air and how to play them. And last December, his daughter Allison starred in a live version of the musical Peter Pan. And he made that a news story on his evening news 3 times. That, I think, is a hanging offense because it shows absolute bad judgment, terrible judgment, making his family a story on a newscast where that is not a news story.
But Armstrong, that happened. Was anyone really that bothered?
You know, I tell you, I think you should engage Howard Kurtz a little more because it bothers me, and maybe he needs to differentiate this for our audience. Is there a thin line or difference between embellishing and outright consistently lying? Because I mean, I know you're only talking about what happened in terms of the real story that he talked about on his newscast. But what about Katrina? What about when he was in Israel? What about when he was a firefighter? It seems as though this has been his. I think this is different from other broadcasts. Yes, people embellish and make themselves look big, but we're talking about somebody who's very had a pathology of just lying. There's a difference here.
Howard Kurtz, what do you reckon 3, 4 offences over all the years that Brian Williams has been both a reporter and now anchorman? Does that make him a bad guy?
Well, actually, he's a very nice guy, very personable guy. He's a very funny guy. One of the reasons he's the most famous presenter in America is because he goes on a lot of comedy shows and shows his lighter side. On these other stories, I've been to New Orleans with Brian Williams after Hurricane Katrina. Whether or not he embellished a little bit there or not is in dispute. Some of these other stories are in dispute. But he slept in the Superdome, the big stadium that had no power, with hundreds or thousands of people. He covered that story. Again, I see the Iraq lie is in a very different category. And I think, but now, once you do that and once you lose that audience's trust, sure, everything he's ever said or done is now being questioned, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, even whether he saved 1 or 2 puppies from a fire when he was a volunteer fireman in New Jersey. That's the level this has reached. That's why NBC had to act.
And Howard, I have to ask you, in today's world, I mean, over here in the UK, hardly anybody under the age of 30 is watching linear TV anymore anyway. And certainly channels like ours, channels like yours, and the other rolling news services in the United States are destinations of choice for many people. Do these network news shows actually matter much anymore, Howard?
They are relics, but they still matter. And Brian Williams, as the #1 guy of the major broadcast networks here in the States, 9 million viewers a night. That's far more than any cable show. Now, the trend obviously is away from everybody sitting around the dinner table watching the news at 6:30, and you've got to be online and all of that. But Brian Williams was the brand, the face of NBC, not just because of that newscast, but because he, as I say, went on all these entertainment shows and made fun of himself, and he was very good at that. So the question is, are the newscasts becoming less relevant? Yes, absolutely. They're a shadow of themselves from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the era of Walter Cronkite. But still, Brian Williams commanded the biggest news audience on television in this country.
So is NBC as a channel, Jeffrey, damaged by this?
Well, no, I don't think, and Howard would know better than I don't think Nightly News made any money. I don't think any of the news programs make a lot of money. I think that they are simply prestige and goes back to this great tradition of the evening news of Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid and Edward R. Murrow and Huntley and Brinkley and Peter Jennings and even Tom Brokaw, on and on and on. Great journalists. And once the credibility is shot, the program is shot because the whole program hangs on that anchor's credibility. Brian broke the vase. It's not repairable.
Armstrong, do you think the networks still matter, and can NBC step over this and get by?
Absolutely, the networks matters. Sky News matters. It matters what Jeffrey and I say. No matter what level or what we bring to these broadcasts, people expect us to be truthful. They expect us to be credible. Yes. And I think we owe them that. And I don't, whether it's Brian Williams or anyone else. And yes, NBC can recover, but only if they look not just at Brian Williams, but they look at the role that they played in allowing this to continuously happening and not protecting not only the brand of Brian Williams, but the brand of that peacock, NBC. So listen, I don't care whether you are, where you are, whether you're a writer, whatever you are, we all learn. And I do hope Brian Williams can come back after 6 months, because I think redemption is something that is very important for Americans. But I think he should have been punished by being suspended without pay. And I think we can all learn from this, that people expect us to be truthful and honest. And when you don't have that credibility, why should we believe anything you're reporting or writing?
Howard, let me put that point to you. It's been announced he's taking 6 months off. That's what the bosses have decided. Do you expect him back on air after that? Hi, here I am.
Well, I don't think he can come back on the air unless he makes a full accounting of not just what he said about in Iraq, but these other stories, including Hurricane Katrina. And also, he needs to ask the American public's forgiveness. He botched the original apology. It was short, it was quick, it was lame, and it contained inaccuracies. So it's a very open question. 6 months is an eternity in television, whether Brian Williams will be able to come back. What bothers me, though, is there's been this sort of mob online just, calling for him to be burned at the stake. And, everybody makes mistakes. This was a very serious mistake. He deserved to be punished in a big way. But there is the question of his whole career to be balanced against that.
I wonder if the bigger talking point, Howard, this weekend is Jon Stewart stepping back.
I'm somebody who's not only been on Jon Stewart's Daily Show, but have been the target of some of his comedic barbs. I not only think he was a cultural phenomenon, he influenced the news business. He was friends with Brian Williams. He had Brian Williams on the show all the time. He changed the way the, quote, real journalists act because of the way he used videotape to make fun of and also to hold accountable politicians and pundits, made everybody else kind of lift their game. He did it in a funny way. We do it in a little more serious way. But you can't underestimate the impact that Jon Stewart has had.
Howard Kurtz, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
29 states in America have a higher minimum wage than the federal government insists upon. In the last couple of weeks, the Democrat-controlled Illinois Senate passed a bill to raise the state's minimum wage to $9 per hour this year and to $11 by 2019. Well, to help us understand the implications of raising the minimum wage, George Faraday joins us. He's the policy director of the labour union Change to Win. What's the upside for employers paying them more minimum wage, George?
Well, they get better quality labour, primarily for the individual employer. And several large employers, including Gap, have raised the wage for just this reason. And they say they need better customer service, and they need the best labour available, and they're going to pay for it.
So why set it as low as even the federal government does? Why not lift it even further if you want to take that argument one step along the line?
Well, we would certainly advocate doing that in our organisation. I mean, a very striking statistic is that if the minimum wage in America had kept pace, not just with inflation, but with productivity since its peak in the 60s, it would now be at $22 an hour. Which tells you just how far workers have fallen behind over the last 40 years.
Well, let's bring in Jeffrey and Armstrong, who are still with us from respectively New York and Washington. Jeffrey, is this affordable?
Yeah, of course it's affordable. In fact, it's very good for everybody. Now, the usual canard that you hear is, oh, no, you raise the minimum wage, you increase unemployment. Not true. In fact, what happens when you raise the minimum wage has been a result of a study that the U.S. Department of Labor did when they looked at 64 other studies. And what they found was a higher hourly rate reduces the expense of employee turnover, increases productivity, fosters positive attitudes, and improves attendance, since such things as transportation, health care, and child care are taken out of the equation. It's good for everybody.
So, Armstrong, it's high time this was done, right?
I so disagree with George. It's not funny. Raising the minimum wage makes workers more expensive. It certainly does not make them more productive. One has really nothing to do with each other. In fact, I speak as an employer who has hundreds of employees, and the minimum wage to some people is a further insult, actually. And it's basically to get the people in the workforce to get skills, the internship, to find mentors, and to really develop the person they want to become, whether it's an entrepreneur, whether the companies that they want to work for, and develop useful, incredible skills that can help them in the long run. To make the argument that raising minimum wages make workers more productive is ludicrous. Obviously, you've not owned the business. The people that you're talking to only support the mindset that you have right now because it makes them more expensive. And I can speak firsthand, not only for me, but many business owners across this country.
George Faraday?
Well, I think you have to look at the impact on the entire economy, which we haven't done yet. And the proportion of the economy that's going to workers' pay has fallen by 10% in the last 20 or so years, which is $1 trillion in lost demand. So for the economy as a whole, if the lowest paid workers were getting a bigger share, that would be a massive increase in demand at a time when fiscal and monetary policy aren't able to deliver those kinds of that kind of boost.
Armstrong, I know there's plenty of studies going on here. The Economic Policy Institute, just one organisation, but they put out a paper saying pay folks $10 an hour, $10.10 I think is their recommendation. That would save the government $7 billion a year because you wouldn't have to do so many state handouts and benefits. Doesn't that sort of argument make sense, Armstrong?
No, listen, I don't want to give the impression that employers like myself are not for helping people make more money, because we understand that is important. But what these low-skilled workers need, they need skills. They need more skills. Many of them out of high school, what high school is producing and colleges are producing today, many of these kids cannot even work. They don't even understand what work ethic and discipline is. A lot of time employers have to spend time mentoring, and you make it an investment to them where you end up getting them to the place they need to be of value to the company, and then they end up going someplace else. I mean, there are so many nuances here that you can't even begin to describe in terms of making that employee valuable. The bottom line is more important for that employee to require skills and access to real resources that can enhance them in the future for their future jobs in terms of the short term. They need more of an apprenticeship. It should not really be about money.
Jeffrey?
Pathetic answer. Absolutely wrong, pathetic answer. This is not only about high school kids working on weekends. This is about second wage earners and families. This is about retirees. This is about real people, not just teenagers, who are out in the workforce, who deserve a living wage, who benefit from a living wage, and the employer benefits. I mean, it's a simple thing. The Department of Labor did a study of 64 other studies, not just one, 64 other studies. And they said it does improve productivity. It does improve everyone's lifestyle, including the employers. And I tend to believe them before I'm going to believe Armstrong on this point.
Isn't there, George Faraday, a moral case for a minimum wage, that it is the decent thing for an affluent, successful society to do?
Well, I think that's true, and I think when you look at the polling data, that 75% of Americans support a major increase in the minimum wage, including the majority of all Republicans. And I think it's a very American way of addressing the problem of poverty and working people standard of living falling behind.
Armstrong,
the problem with that argument, and I understand the point that George is trying to make, but I think that George and I may agree with this, but the people that you're trying to help, that you say that are in poverty, below the poverty line, are not the ones ending up with these low minimum wage jobs. They're just not. You have many people, especially the economy that we had 2 or 3 years ago, where people were desperate to find employment. You found lawyers and engineering waiting in line at places like McDonald's and other places. And so in other words, when these low minimum wage jobs for $10 and $12 an hour were available, they were scooped up by people who are overqualified. So the very people that you talk about that you're trying to help are not the people that will end up with these minimum wage jobs in the first place.
Nonsense.
Why is it nonsense, Jeffrey?
Oh, it's total nonsense. I mean, come on, don't be ridiculous. You look at the people, not just the minimum, not just the ill-qualified. You look at the people who are working minimum wage, and they are second family earners. They're the wife or the husband going out trying to help the family. These people need a lift up, and when you help them, it's not a question of bringing them out of poverty. It's a question of bringing them up to what is called the national poverty line and getting them above that line, and that is good for everybody. It's good for employees, and it's especially good for employer. Nonsense.
You did not hear a word I said what I said.
I heard every word you said.
And it is a fact that the very people that you speak of are not ending up with these low minimum wage jobs in the first place. You're clueless.
Yes, they are.
You have never run a business.
Absolutely,
you have no idea what you're talking about. Absolutely no idea.
Go to any shopping mall in Florida.
I don't need to go. I live it every day.
And look on the weekend at the retirees.
I live it every day. It is not true.
You're too cheap to pay them. That's all.
George Faraday, the LA mayor, Eric Garcetti, recommends $13 an hour is a fair wage. Is that affordable? That's quite a hike, even what you're talking about today.
Well, in a city like LA, which is a rich city with a lot of highly paid workers, it would seem very affordable. And as I said, if the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity, in other words, if with the growth of the American economy, it would be $22 an hour. So 13 is still half of that. So why is it that in the 1960s no one was required to work for such a small slice of the economic pie, and now we don't feel we can do that?
I mean, the other thing that factors in here is there's a lot of discussion, I think, as to whether this should actually be a state-by-state matter. And some states, as we know, have minimum wage either set at federal level or below or above and everything else. And some of them like their independence to be able to do that. Isn't that appropriate? So if you don't like what the minimum wage is in some part of the country, you can always go and live somewhere else.
Well, I think, there's another way of raising wages, which may be more appropriate in some parts of the country and for occupations that aren't at the minimum wage level right now, and that's collective bargaining. And that allows workers to determine the wage level that is appropriate for their business, if they're empowered to do so to bargain with their employers. And that's something which has declined in America in the last 40 years, but we believe the president could take action to promote collective bargaining once more, using the vast spending power that he has in the private sector economy, where public procurement is over 11% of the economy.
George Faraday, Policy Director of Change to Win, thanks for being with us today. Next, the lavish and palatial condo that was home to the late Joan Rivers for 25 years is now up for sale. The 11-room penthouse occupies 3 floors of New York's Upper East Side. The home was originally built in 1903 for a family of Gilded Age millionaires and socialites. And for $28 million, you too can enjoy the unique Louis XIV inspired decor. Even if I had the money, Armstrong, I'm not sure if it's really me. What do you think?
I think Jeffrey should buy it, but however, I couldn't resist that. So listen, I'm sure Joan's daughter Melissa has a reason for selling it. I'm sure there's a lot of pain. It's surprising that she's held this massive unit for so long, that she'd want to sell it, because it's probably, if she did not get second mortgages on it, she's probably paid off all the debt and it's probably mortgage free. And I'm sure when you have a tax estate and you go through lawyers and taxes, there are issues that you have to deal with where a lot of money must be paid. And I'm sure you will find a buyer for it. It's Joan Rivers, but spending $28 million, I got to tell you something. Like I said, I'll leave that to my brother, Jeffrey. It's all yours, Jeffrey. It's all yours.
Well, first of all, would you? I'm not sure if you got the money in the bank, Jeffrey, but would you go Upper East Side even if you did?
I'm writing a check right now, and I want Armstrong to know there is a guest room for him. Not a problem.
As long as I don't have to pay for it.
The only difference between Joan's place and my place is that she has straight bookshelves and I don't. That's the only difference. Listen, I met her in 1966 when I was a staff writer on the Mike Douglas Show, which was a talk show, and she was Joni in those days. And she's a wonderful woman. She really was. I liked her a lot. We would bump into her over the years. She had struck it big on the Tonight Show, and was doing stand-up at a time when women were not doing stand-up. And she was very funny. She was also extremely accessible. My wife bumped into her in London, and about 3 months later in Miami airport, she came up to my wife. Joan came up to Aileen and said, "I know you. Where did I meet you before?" I mean, she was that accessible and that fun. We went to a party one night where she entertained, and she was paid $100 grand for a stand-up act. And she was filthy. Absolutely filthy. She had missed the mark because it was families and there were kids in the audience, and she really blew it that night. But I also bumped into a man who had been engaged to her for 6 or 7 years, man her own age. And I said, "Why didn't you get married?" And he said, "It was all about the prenup." I said, "What about the prenup?" He said, "Joan presented him with a piece of paper that said, everything I, Joan Rivers, bring to the marriage is mine, and everything you bring to the marriage is also mine." And that ended that.
What? Oh,
yes.
My goodness.
That's a great deal.
But you know, let me just say
down.
one thing. Let me just say one thing, that she was picking up $25 million a year in the fashion business with QVC selling jewelry. I mean, her fashion company was $1 billion company. So Melissa's not wanting for money, and it's not a question of I have to sell the apartment. I think the will was $135 million. I think that's what she left Melissa. So
okay. Guys, we've got to leave it there for this week. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and to Armstrong. Thank you. And thank you for watching. That's it for this edition of The Debate. Until next time, goodbye.